Chapter 2. Cam steeled himself for whatever he might face inside the airport terminal after everything he'd seen outside. He could clearly see the power was off inside the terminal, where darkness prevailed in the deeper recesses of the structure's corridors. "Jen, grab Taylor. I've got Layla. Let's get inside and down to the rental garage." He didn't wait for her response. Instead, he grabbed Layla by an arm and guided her through the broken glass door the man had created with the luggage cart. From behind him, Jen's voice quivered. "Cam, I'm scared." He wished he hadn't said that out loud and in front of the kids, but he understood and was getting there himself. "We're good," he muttered, his voice unconvincing, even to himself. At the escalator, he added yet another item to his list of things not working at the airport. The situation wouldn't have been so damn frightening if his and Jen's phones or the kids' iPads worked. Unfortunately, they didn't, thrusting on him the panicked feeling that they were in deep trouble, thousands of miles from home, and he was without a weapon. He ushered Jen and Taylor ahead of him as they descended the static escalator steps. Others were climbing the frozen steps on the opposite side, but no one was descending with them. At the bottom, they made straight for the rental car garage, following the signs until they rounded a corner and saw the small shack used by the company's employees. A middle-aged man stood in front of the shack and waved his hands as the Griffins hurried towards him. "No cars going out today, guys," the man announced with a shake of his head. Cam stopped when he was close enough to read the name tag, Matt. "Hey, Matt, what's the deal with the cars?" Matt shrugged, his eyes wide, brows raised. "Don't know, nothing is running, and people are saying a couple planes crashed, so, yeah, nothing is going out." "Like the cars won't start?" Cam pressed. "Yeah, man, power's out, cars aren't running, and even my phone is off." Cam tugged at his ear, his mind racing, processing all that was happening. "Okay, thanks, man," he murmured distractedly. He turned and moved back toward the escalators, only to be stopped by Jen as she positioned herself to block him. "We're not going another step until you tell me what is going on. Or at least what you think is going on," she demanded. He drew a breath, glancing at the two children who stood less than 10 feet from their parents, looking more worried than when they descended the dead escalator steps. "I don't know anything for sure. But if I were to make an educated guess, I'd say we're at war, Jen. Some country, Russia or maybe China, has hit us with a weapon to knock out all the electronics. It's the only thing that makes any sense right now." "What are you talking about, Cam? What weapon can do that?" "It's like a nuke, only detonated way up high and not intended to kill people, but the radiation or whatever comes off those things will destroy most devices with a motherboard or an electronic component." Jen's hand had slowly made its way to her mouth as her husband spoke, and now she gasped through her cupped fingers. "How are we getting home, Cameron? We're 1,000,000 miles from Tennessee," she sputtered, her eyes locked on his, blinking rapidly as the adrenaline threatened to unhinge her. "Babe, we're not going home. At least not for a while." "Cameron Griffin," she shrilled. "You're scaring me now." Cam pursed his lips as he came to terms with the fact that he had two problems, not just one. He was tasked with both his family's safety and also with keeping their sanity intact, so he chose his words carefully. "Listen, guys." He motioned the kids in closer. "We need to get to Grandpa and Grandma Griffin's house. Then we can start to figure out what we do next." "Walk?" Taylor asked, his tone matter-of-fact. "How far is it?" Layla asked, her face scrunched as if what she was hearing was ridiculous. "About 60 miles. It should take at least 3, maybe 4, even 5 days, depending." The regret in his voice did nothing to soften the shock of walking 60 miles. "Cameron Griffin, we have 2 children. We can't walk all the way to your parents' house," Jen argued. "You got a better idea?" he fired back, just a little too quickly. "You better come up with a better one," Jen snapped, her face reddening in anger. "We walk, that's the plan," he reiterated. "We can head up to the El Camino and then north. We'll try to find a store that sells backpacks, maybe a tent or other camping-type stuff. I have cash. His wife knew he always carried $1,500 in cash, jokingly calling it his slush fund, though he never used the cash for anything other than family needs. For a moment, she stood her ground as if she was going to refuse to leave the airport, her hands cupping her jawline, elbows pressed tightly against her chest. Then she relaxed and nodded. "We better get going then." He wanted to smile, but felt a pit in his stomach. "Let's go, kiddos." They pulled their suitcases out of the airport, using the road since there were no vehicles racing along any of the paved surfaces. It felt strange walking in between and around all the marooned trucks and cars as they pushed west past people who were milling about, confused by the unresponsive conditions of their transportation modes. Cam kept to the right, taking the on-ramp for Highway 101, intending to walk north until he could exit at San Bruno Avenue, which would take them to the El Camino Real. He reached the top of the on-ramp before the rest of his family and stopped to wait as they straggled up behind him. Jen's face was flushed by the time she reached his side and halted, riding her suitcase and unzipping the thin sweat jacket she'd worn for the trip out. "We need to find a place to sleep tonight. There's no way we're walking all the way to your parents in one day." He looked up at the crowded highway. People were the only objects moving on what had previously been one of the busiest highways in the nation, if not the world. He heard his wife's words, but they only added to the gravity of their situation and tugged at him in a way that was beginning to scare the hell out of him. "I know," he said softly, stealing a look at his kids, their faces looking up at him in question. "We can't expect the kids to walk 60 miles, even if it's spread out over a few days." "I could walk to Papa's house," Taylor proclaimed indignantly. "How far is 60 miles? Layla asked, her face creased with worry. "It's far, baby," Cam told her. "Like walking to your school and back 7 or 8 times. "I could totally do that," Taylor said proudly. "Without rest?" Layla asked seriously, as if they were figuring out whether to compete in some tough mutter competition, but wanted to know how far and difficult the race would be before committing. Cam knew they were committed, and there would be no pulling out and getting your money back if the race got too problematic. What would be required of him and his family would be to come up with ways to lessen their hardships. "We don't have a choice about going to Papa's place without a car, but we can figure out how to make ourselves more comfortable getting there," Cam said. "I need a bike," Layla replied. Cam snapped his fingers and pointed at his daughter. "Nails, baby, you are nails. We do need bikes. All of us." Jen nodded at the mention of a faster method of travel. Where do we get bikes, and how do we pay for them?" He shook his head, his eyes scanning the road ahead while his mind raced through all the possibilities for procuring bicycles for a family of 4. Adult bicycles would do for everyone except Layla. She'd need a smaller bike, but one with gear so there would be no pushing up hills. 3 things we have to make happen today: lose these suitcases for backpacks, get bikes, and find a place to sleep. Inside. "What about water, Dad?" Taylor added. Cam ground his teeth as he realized his 12-year-old was coming up with essentials he'd not thought of initially. He relaxed, dropping his shoulders, and turned to Taylor. "Yes, and some food. Good thinking, Tay." The next 2 hours were spent walking up Highway 101, then transitioning west onto San Bruno Avenue until it intersected El Camino Real. Along the way, they'd spoken to several people stranded along the road, all in much the same predicament as they were, although their homes weren't on the other side of the country. No one seemed to know the cause of the massive electrical outage, but people were already talking about how the government would have things figured out in a day or 2. In the distance, the 3 downed commercial airliners burned, filling the sky with acrid black smoke from their flaming fuselages. What people weren't talking about was the lack of first responders, and Cam didn't bother pointing out what he felt was an obvious red flag. While walking along El Camino Real, Cam directed his family towards a small convenience store where an Asian man stood just inside the glass door peering out, his eyes tracking the Griffin's approach suspiciously. In the middle of the store's small parking lot, Cam gave a little wave to the Asian man in the store. "You open?" he called out. The man's face remained impassive as his eyes lifted from Cam's family and searched the streets to the rear and both sides. Cam was about to halt his family when the man in the store made the slightest of gestures with his head, beckoning them inside as he stepped out of their way and pulled the door open. "Cash only. Register's not working. No credit cards," the man snapped in heavily accented English. "Yeah, no problem. Thanks," Cam muttered, ushering his family inside. He and Jen went up and down the aisles, stuffing snacks and water bottles into a small carry basket the store provided. During their shopping spree, they remained always under the watchful eye of the Asian man. Once they were finished collecting what they could carry, Jen recoiled as she approached the counter. The Asian man stood off to one side of the cashier counter, not blocking, but in a position to block their exit, if necessary, and he was holding a short-barreled shotgun. Cam took everything in and grabbed Jen by the elbow, pulling her behind him as he fished cash from his pants pocket. "We're all good here, man," he said, trying to placate the clerk. "No one is taking off on you." The armed store attendant, or owner, whichever he was, stood his ground for a moment, then lowered the gun and moved behind the counter. He took a pen and paper and began taking a tally of the items the Griffins placed on his counter. When he completed the math, Cam paid him $70. The total was $68 and change, but he didn't figure the man was giving out change, so he rounded it to the nearest 10 and told the man to keep the rest. Back outside, Cam wished he'd brought a pistol, but flying with a weapon, especially into California, where possession of just about every firearm on the market was a felony, was just too much of a pain in the neck, so he traveled unarmed. Whatever was going on was bad, there was no doubt about that. But if the government came back online in a week, he didn't want to be that guy who went all Mad Max, carrying illegal weapons and getting into gunfights that would later be termed crimes. Crimes he'd be made to pay for through prison time. He just needed to focus on pushing through his list of things to do and get, all the while pressing on toward his parents' house in Sonoma. Again, there was that tug by something deep inside his brain. The depth of the tickle in his mind was so deep, Cam doubted he or anyone in his family lineage had used that portion of their brain in the past several hundred, or maybe thousands of years. The sensation was telling him to abandon himself, which confused him. A 10,000-year-old reptilian ignite signaling for adjustments to his lifestyle in order to survive upcoming change. Shortly after their stop at the convenience store, Jen spotted a sporting goods store across the street not far ahead. So much for harping on the kids to look both ways, he thought, as he stepped off the curb and picked his way through the stranded vehicles littering El Camino Real. Many of the people who'd previously been lingering near their vehicles seemed to have made the decision to abdicate from their untrustworthy combustion-driven steeds, leaving the roadways less crowded with the puzzled travelers. They were met at the front door by a skinny, pleasant-faced, middle-aged manager whose name tag identified him as Greg. "Sorry, folks. All the registers are down. We can't process transactions until the power comes back on." Cam shook his head as he closed with Greg. "The power isn't coming back on, friend. Look around. Cars are tanked, and I bet your phone doesn't work either. Am I right?" he asked grimly. Greg swallowed hard, his mouth moving, but no words followed. He gathered himself. What are you talking about? The power isn't coming back on." "I mean, I think our country is at war," Cam said, double-checking to make sure he'd read the name tag correctly. "Greg." Almost as if on cue, the scream of jet engines roared overhead as 4 small fighter-style jets flashed across the sky, heading west. The noise was deafening as the planes passed over, not more than 700 or 800 feet off the ground. Cam could see ordnance strapped to the undercarriages of all 4 aircraft in the split second before they were gone, their engine noise fading as they cleared the coastal range and finally disappeared. "Okay, that was weird," Craig mouthed as he removed his hands from his ears. Jen stepped forward. "Can we come in? My children need backpacks and we have cash. You don't need electricity to take cash." Greg stared at the children, suitcases in tow, and finally relented, stepping out of their way and allowing them inside the store. Cam stood aside, waiting for Jen and the kids to step through the door before he entered. After Cam crossed the threshold, Greg pushed the door closed and locked it. Inside the sporting goods store, Cam instructed Jen to get Layla and herself good walking shoes and ditch the fashionable flats they'd worn on the plane. He and Taylor moved to the far back corner of the store to a wall covered in hanging backpacks. The backpacks were all knockoffs of more expensive brands, but that didn't matter right now. They needed a way to haul their belongings on their backs, something with a storage system that offered multiple pockets and pouches for securing water, food, and their personal effects. Suitcases were great for traveling in planes and even cars, but they didn't pass muster when it came to traveling on foot. Cam chose 4 backpacks, opened his suitcase, and transferred some of the clothing and all his toiletries over to his pack. Taylor didn't wait to be told and started doing the same with his suitcase and newly acquired backpack. Minutes later, they pulled their empty suitcases over to the shoe department, wearing their new backpacks. Greg was helping Jen with a pair of running shoes, and Layla already wore a pink pair of Nikes. Hiking, not running shoes, guys. They'll be shredded if we go cross-country in them, he warned, taking in what the ladies were doing. They're for running, like running marathons, Jen argued. We're not running a marathon, babe. We're hiking to Papa's house. Get shoes made to get wet and take a beating. Greg left and returned with another pair of runners, and Jen slipped her right foot into them. These are comfortable, Cameron. More comfortable than hiking shoes or boots, Jen admonished as she pulled on the left shoe. Okay, get 'em, but get the hiking shoes too, and I'll carry them. Greg scurried back and forth between the two ladies in the back room where the store kept the shoes until both Jen and Layla were outfitted with 2 pairs. Cam rounded the bill to $500 and was about to leave when a motorcycle pulled up front. The bike was a BMW and appeared to be some sort of Baja or cross-country enduro setup. The rider honked at the front, apparently unwilling to leave his cycle unattended. Cam watched as Greg pocketed the $500 and hurried to the door, unlocking it and leaning out to speak with the mysterious rider. He moved closer to the door, his eyes fixated on the biker as he approached, wondering where the heck the guy got a working motorcycle. Before he reached the door, Greg closed and relocked it. Who is that? Cam asked curiously. Barry. I don't know his last name, but he comes in and buys stuff all the time. He's here for some fishing gear he ordered last week. At the door, he saw the interior locking mechanism needed a key, effectively stopping him from leaving until Greg returned with Gary's fishing gear. Cam eyed Barry through the window and could tell it was making the biker nervous, which he couldn't care less about. Barry turned the front wheel, repositioning it so he could speed away if the need arose. Greg returned, holding a shopping bag. As soon as the door was unlocked, Cam pushed his way outside and toward Barry, who for the briefest of moments looked as though he might desert his fishing gear pickup and rocket away. Cam held his hands up in mock surrender. Man, where'd you get this, or how'd you get it to run? Barry shot a look at Greg as he stepped through the door, bag in hand, then met Cam's stare. This bike is mine, and it runs because I knew this thing was coming. I told people, but no one wanted to listen. They were all too busy liking TikTok videos of house moms doing stupid dances in their kitchens. You knew what was coming, Cam plowed on. The compartment on the side of the bike was open. Greg dropped the fishing gear in. Barry reached back and slammed the lid shut. Although Barry wore a full-face helmet, they could all see the sardonic look that spread across his face as he answered. EMP! Solar flare! Doesn't matter. It's all gone now, and you are all gonna die. The engine revved as Barry flicked his wrist, and the bike shot from the sidewalk back onto the paved parking lot and disappeared, heading south on El Camino Real.